Welcome back to our yearly reading through the scriptures, and I really hope these short 7-8 minute introductions give you a context to your reading so you kind of know what's going on. And here we come here to this section, chapter 65 of Isaiah, and we'll move into the first 10 chapters of Jeremiah. This is session 39. What is interesting as we come to the end of Isaiah is this is Isaiah's eschatology. That is, this is how he views the future, because he's saying again, judgment has come upon you, stiff-necked people, and that's why you're in Babylon in captivity, but I will not bail out on you. God is engaged. God promises a future Messiah who's going to restore them to a new kingdom. And here he's going to talk about that new kingdom of the future. As a matter of fact, in Isaiah 65, it says, "For behold, I create a new heaven and a new earth. Former things will not be remembered or come to mind." And then he says something very interesting. Verse 20, "No longer will there be in it an infant who lives but a few days, or an old man who does not live out his days. For the youth will die at the age of 100. And people wonder, well, what is that all about? Well, you got to remember that Jesus was asked about life after death. And long story short, when Jesus answered, he said, we're going to be like the angels. Neither do we give in marriage because we're going to have these glorified bodies. We're not going to continue to have children. But here in the new heaven, new earth, it looks like there's children and infants and even death. That's because this is not talking about the new heaven, new earth of Revelation 21. But this is talking about God fulfilling his promises to his people, as he made those promises here, to restore a kingdom to them. They call it the millennium, the 1,000-year reign. Revelation chapter 20 makes reference to it again and again and again, that you will reign for 1,000 years. And in that, these Jews alive at that time will enter in physical bodies, and they will receive all the fulfilled promises that God has made to the nation of Israel. And this is their infants, their children. And then we move into new heaven, new earth. Well, now we move into the book of Jeremiah. And let me give you the context. Jeremiah has been called the weeping prophet. The reason is because for 40 years, he's going to be prophesying to these stiff-necked people. Now, the timing's a little different here. Let me give you the context. Remember, you have King David, and you have his son Solomon. And Solomon's son splits the kingdom. Rehoboam, he takes 2 of the tribes down south. It becomes known as Judah, and that's the throne of David. But Rehoboam basically takes the 10 tribes up to the north. That's called Ephraim, or later known the northern kingdom, or Israel. Well, as you might also remember, is that because every king in the north was evil, God finally uses Assyria. And he brings Assyria to exile all the people in the northern kingdom under God's discipline. That was around 722 BC. Well, what's happened is we're about 125 years later, and Judah, the southern kingdom, is like, learn something from what happened to the people up in the north. They continued to rebel against God, and finally God used another country, Assyria, to punish them and remove them from the land. Well, God's going to do the same thing to Judah, the very throne of David here, 125 years later, but instead of Assyria, it's going to be Babylon. And so here is Jeremiah, and he's given this message of doom for the full 40 years. He's not a real popular prophet, but he is a contemporary with Zephaniah, Habakkuk, Daniel, Ezekiel, and he's going to keep warning them. Now, some people are a little confused with this because he's going to talk about Babylon will come, and the last king of the Judah, the 20th king, will be Jedediah, and he's killed. Well, what about the promise of David's kingdom that's going to last forever, that was promised by God in 2 Samuel chapter 7 to David himself? After this particular year of 597, there is no throne of David. It's like the throne of David disappears. But you see, that's why the genealogy of Matthew 1 and the genealogy of Jesus is so important, because it would be a branch of David, and that branch would be traced all the way to Jesus Christ himself. Jesus would sit on the throne of his Father, David and all the fulfilled promises God gave to David in 2 Samuel 7 about his kingdom and the kingdom to be forever. It is that there will be the Son, Jesus Christ, the Son of David, who will reign on that kingdom. So that's not really a problem at all. All I have to say this, as you move through these 10 chapters in Jeremiah, the first chapter is fascinating. It's the call of Jeremiah. And you're going to find he's called when he's still in his mother's womb. Boy, this has something to say about this issue today about pro-choice and pro-life and abortion. Because here is a prophet of God in the womb of his mother, like Psalm 139 says that God weaves us in our mother's womb. Here, God not only would weave Jeremiah, but would call him to be a prophet to the nations when he was still in his mother's womb. That is not fetal material. That is a human being. That is a person. And so chapter 1, Jeremiah is going to be called to this ministry. And his ministry, basically, you're going to find, he keeps warning the people of Judah, learn from your brothers who rebelled against God up in Ephraim, northern kingdom, taken away from Assyria. Same thing's going to happen to you. And God's going to use a country of another tongue, that is the Babylonians. And that's actually what's going to happen. So you'll read the first 10 chapters and you'll get kind of a hint of what's going on. But we'll pick it up in Jeremiah 11 through 24 next week in our reading. I hope this was helpful. We'll talk to you then.